Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to call the Assembly Committee on Judiciary to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen. Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasner. Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here.
Assemblyman Ornlicker.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Chairman Yeager.
Here, and I'll note for the record that Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong is here. I think she might have been having some trouble with her mute button. I think we have everyone other than Assemblywoman Krasner, so please mark her absent for the time being, and I'll try to note for the record when she arrives. So we do have a quorum. Good morning, everyone. I missed you yesterday morning, not having Judiciary, but I hope you all were able to take advantage of a little bit of extra time in your schedule. Good morning to those who may be joining us either on the legislature's website or on the YouTube channel, and welcome to day 23 of the 81st session of the legislature. Before we get started this morning, I'll go over just a couple of housekeeping rules. I think you're probably sick of hearing these already, but I want to go over them just in case we have new folks joining in or watching the proceedings. So for members on the Zoom, make sure that you mute yourself when you're not speaking. That'll help with the audio feedback. And then we do expect courtesy and respect in our interactions with one another in this committee. We don't always agree on everything. That's perfectly fine. That's what the legislative process is for. But we need to make sure we're being respectful to one another and to those who are presenting or testifying on bills. And then finally, many members are using multiple devices to participate in the Zoom meeting, including phones, laptops, extra monitors, desktop computers. So please don't take it as a sign of disrespect or inattention if a member appears to be looking away during the meeting. They're probably looking at exhibits or trying to process other information on other monitors as we navigate this virtual environment. So with that behind us, we're going to move to our two agenda items. Members, as you can see, we have two bills on the agenda today. So at this time, I'm going to formally open the hearing on Assembly Bill 7. Assembly Bill 7 revises provisions relating to gaming. I will note for the members, there is a proposed amendment by the Gaming Control Board that should be up on Nellis, and I sent that to you all last night, but it was pretty late, so I apologize for that. By the time I had a chance to get back to my email, a little later than I thought it would be, but that is up on Nellis for members of the committee and members of the public. And I'd like to welcome to the committee at this time, Mr. Katsoros, who is a member of the Gaming Control Board, and Mr. Morton, who is also with the Gaming Control Board. And you may remember he helped present the Gaming Control Board presentation. I think it was last week. It might have been the week before. But gentlemen, I want to welcome you to the committee. We'll give you a chance to review Assembly Bill 7, get through your presentation, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions. So when you're ready, please proceed with Assembly Bill 7.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Good morning, Chair Morgan. Sorry, Chair Yeager. Bad habit, old habit, good habit. Members of the committee, for the record, I'm Phil Katsaris. I'm one of the board members with the Nevada Gaming Control Board, as you mentioned. This is my first time presenting to the members of the legislature, and I just want to say it's an honor for me to be here today. I know we're all here for the same reason, and that's to continue to improve the living standards for the citizenry of Nevada. And for that, I'm delighted to be part of this process, and I'm going to do everything, and the Gaming Control Board is going to do everything to do our part. Before I get into the meat of the proposal, I'd just like to recognize firstly the great folks we have at the GCB. We do have a remarkable team, and as it concerns our proposed changes here that I'll be running through today, there were numerous individuals within the Gaming Control Board that contributed to crafting these. And I want to thank everybody at the Gaming Control Board for their part in this process. The central theme here is simply to continue to improve upon and modernize NRS 463 for the betterment of the state. There's many parts to this, of course, but drawing upon this broad-based theme, if you will, we collectively brought together these worthwhile BDRs to propose at this time. And that's what we've done here. I do want to recognize one other individual specifically, and Chair Yeager just mentioned him, but he was central in coordinating all our efforts here today. He's the glue in this process, and some of you already know him, it seems. That's Mr. Morton. He's our senior research analyst. And his title is essentially, it's woefully underwhelming, frankly, for what he does. He's a rock within our organization and a go-to person for whatever is needed. He's here to provide support in anything I need, and also to, I guess, somewhat elbow me in case I go off message, which I tend to do sometimes, Bill. Thank you, Michael. And with that, Chair Yeager, sorry about that. With your permission, I can get into the specifics of our proposals.
That sounds great. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Katsoros. And it's no problem if you call me Chair Morgan. I think that might be an upgrade from my current position. So that
it rolls off the tongue.
Certainly welcome.
I've been around 2 years, and she's been, I've been at her side for about 75% of that. So Assembly Bill number 7 is written, proposes 6 changes to the Gaming Control Act. For the ease of the members following along, I'll present each change from the bill and the proposed amendment that the board has submitted as an exhibit, rather than go through the sections of the bill in chronological order. So inter-casino link systems, the first proposed change here. It's a change to a specific type of license currently in statute. Section 7 of the bill contains the existing definition of a non-restricted license. The definition of a non-restricted license lists the 4 types of non-restricted licenses currently issued by the board. Section 7 deletes the required licensure for or the operation of an inter-casino link system. And instead, Section 2 then amends the definition of associated equipment to then include inter-casino link systems. Pursuant to NRS 463665, manufacturers and distributors of associated equipment currently register with the board rather than seek licensure. All sections 1, 4, 6 through 8, 10 through 13, 15 through 19, 21 and 23 simply make conforming changes by removing other references to inter-casino link systems, as the term would now just be included in the definition of associated equipment. So housekeeping sort of items there. The only other specific reference to inter-casino link systems is in Section 9. And this section of statute gives the Nevada Gaming Commission authority to regulate inter-casino link systems. So we need that in there, of course. The board is proposing this change for registration of inter-casino link systems as associated equipment rather than full licensure, as a recognition of technological advancements, both in the industry and at the board, that have assured the board that the technology involved with the inter-casino link system no longer poses a potential danger to the gaming industry, to then still require the full investigation that is involved in the issuance of a gaming license. This will allow for quicker development of new or modified inter-casino link systems onto gaming floors without sacrificing needed regulatory oversight. The last piece of the change related to inter-casino link systems is in Section 20. And this section requires the registration of those associated with the manufacturing and distribution of associated equipment. The board is proposing changes to Section 20 that mirror other registrations that the board currently issues, such as service providers, for instance. These changes would allow the board to set the registration fee and regulation just as we do with other registrations, and then extend the renewal window from the current statutory 3-year period. With respect to the changes related to inter-casino link systems, the board has offered a proposed amendment. The amendment document proposes a slight change to Section 8, and that's to ensure that all information and data submitted to the board regarding technology continues to remain confidential. It also proposes a change to Section 9. the use of the term manufacturers and distributors, it inadvertently cuts out a certain type of license from the operation of inter-casino link systems if the bill were to pass as is. So we wanted to take the opportunity to clear this up. The next area would be our new games approval. As written, Section 3 of AB 7 would change the definition of game or gaming or gambling game to require games to be approved by the board rather than the commission. Upon further internal discussions that occurred between the pre-filing of this bill and today, the board is proposing further changes to Section 3, as well as a new section associated with the approval of new games. The board is proposing the amendment to the approval of new games to ensure the proper vetting of new games, while also ensuring that new games can be deployed more rapidly and yet in a responsible and safe manner. Additionally, the definition of game and gambling game contains a lengthy list of games as examples that are allowable under Nevada law. These date back to the 60s, frankly. And some of the old gambling games contain some potentially insensitive and offensive terms and serve no regulatory purpose. While the board traditionally defers these sort of policy decisions to the legislature, we do take it upon ourselves to identify such issues and attempt to correct them when they're noted. So in this regard, the amendment document proposes the removal of these certain terms contained in NRS. It's 4630152. The next section has to do with updating some of the technology language, and that's in sections 2, 3, and 5 of this bill. We'd like to remove the word electromechanical from various portions of the definitions in chapter 463 of NRS, as the word is frankly obsolete relating to the specific definitions where we're deleting them. Live entertainment tax. This in section 2, you'll see there's some proposals. We propose a technical change to how live entertainment taxes are displayed on tickets to events that are subject to live entertainment tax. On the surface, the term admission charge appears to be a simple number. However, in practice, admission charges become very complicated and convoluted and can be comprised of many different components involving the sale or the ticket price, because we've got multiple service providers or service charges and other fees, as you've probably experienced. So due to the limitations of some ticketing systems, for instance, Ticketmaster, for example, the ticket price, service charges, and fees must all be displayed as individual line items on the ticket in order for the system to properly classify each item into the proper category on the accounting reports. Therefore, these components may not be lumped together in one admission charge number for ticket display purposes. The categorization becomes even more challenging when service charges and fees are split between parties. The taxability of that split will then depend on who implemented the fee and what parties retain a portion, because only a portion of that fee is taxable and therefore part of the total admission charge. Displaying this split charge is sometimes impossible for gaming licenses to cope with. Therefore, rather than requiring some of these legacy systems, as I mentioned, Ticketmaster, which is used globally, and others to rework their ticketing systems in order to comply, the board's proposing a change in the requirement to display the requirement, to change the display requirement to just display the tax that is paid. That'll clear up everything. Patrons would still be aware of how much they're paying in live tax, and it's a simple number to display. The amount of tax imposed and collected is not affected, it's just the display. However, when the board submitted this legislation for drafting, the language it submitted was changed to rightly reflect the bifurcation of authority between the taxation department and the Gaming Control Board. The board is currently working with Department of Taxation to make this language work universally, as the bifurcation would not alleviate the burden of legacy ticketing systems, but only create a separate display requirement based on where the taxable event is taking place. The board plans on submitting additional amendments to this section prior to any work session on AB 7. Event wagering, section 23, it repeals NRS 463.800. This was enacted in 2015 to authorize entity wagering. As written, 463.800 authorizes a race book or sports pool to accept wagers from a business entity that has established a wagering account. In practice, business entities were created to pool individuals' money together in hopes of creating return on their investment. However, since 2015, entity wagering has proven to be somewhat of a stain on the industry. It's led to several federal investigations and indictments relating entity wagering, sometimes in certain cases to Ponzi schemes and so forth. And for this reason, the board is proposing full repeal of this provision. If we go on to section, also in section 23, with respect to employee labor organizations, section 23 repeals the entirety of chapter 463A of NRS, which regulated the personnel of labor organizations for casino gaming employees. The chapter was enacted in 1975 and never substantially amended, and a wellspring of employee labor organizations, the gaming industry, never really materialized. Nevertheless, after further internal discussions and review, following the pre-filing of this legislation, the board is now proposing that the chapter 463A of NRS no longer be repealed in this bill. This change is reflected in the amendment document that we have recently submitted. And that really concludes the presentation the board has for Assembly Bill number 7 here, but Mr. Morton and I are prepared to answer any questions the committee may have at this time.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Katsouros. And I have a couple questions I'll just kind of ask right out the gate, and then I'll hand it over to members. So you had talked quite a bit about inter-casino linked systems, and I think I understand what you're trying to do in the bill. I just wondered if you could provide an example or two of what an intra-casino linked system is just in the real world, so members
Sure.
kind of have a sense of what we're regulating here.
Sure. So an inter-casino link system, it's an important piece of equipment in the gaming industry, but essentially it's a calculator. It's a glorified metering device. So it links progressives, for instance, that you may see on casinos floors, and calculates the amount of activity that is occurring so that it can display the proper amount of funds that are being metered and incremented to those meters that you would traditionally see on the casinos. It doesn't determine the outcome of a patron's win. It doesn't have involvement in that respect. It's essentially what I would call a glorified metering device. And I think at the onset of this, just like many things in the industry, when it's new, the inclination, and I think it's the right inclination, is to grab hold of it and make sure you've got control of whatever it is we're regulating first. And as we become comfortable with it and understand it more over time, we realize whether or not that was the appropriate amount of sort of regulatory oversight or not. And we're adjusting accordingly, in our view.
Thank you for that response. So let me just give an example and tell me if I've got it right. So I'm thinking about, the slot machines in casinos, and particularly the Mega Bucks progressive jackpot or the Wheel of Fortune progressive jackpot. When you're in the casino, you sort of see that meter that's increasing in value, presumably based on play at all the properties. So I think what you're saying is the interlinked casino system is sort of, it links all those machines together so the jackpots can sort of be actual real-time updated among the properties. Is that correct?
100%.
Okay, great. I think that helps. And then the other question I had, you touched on it a little bit, but in section 23, the removal of the entity wagering provision. I was not here as an elected at the time, but I remember being in the building when that bill was being considered and ultimately passed. And I remember, there was, I guess, some some great hope or some great promise that this would be some kind of a unique investment tool for individuals who maybe didn't want to invest in the stock market, but rather wanted to invest in the sports betting market. Now, I certainly understand that there have been some issues, hopefully not in Nevada, but around the country. But I just wondered if you could give me a sense, like, did that entity Wagering just not really pan out in Nevada the way that folks thought it would? Because I think the testimony was, they really thought this would be sort of the next big thing, but did that just not come to pass here in Nevada?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It did not necessarily flourish to the extent I think many had hoped. This was not a gaming control board bill at the time, I believe, and I wasn't around. I was sort of on the other side of the aisle in the industry at that time. But as I recall, it was an industry effort and a push. And look, I have the luxury of hindsight to say, yeah, it didn't really pan out. At the time, I think the notion was that you'd be able to pool funds together in Nevada, sort of reaching into the investors and pockets of others outside of Nevada, pull that money into Nevada, and then create incremental revenues and growth with the sports wagering industry. And by all accounts, that didn't necessarily happen. I think at one point, if I'm not mistaken, since that time, there was only one sports book that was actually accepting wagers from these type of business entities. And there was less than a dozen, I believe, that were formed. Don't quote me on that, but I think it would have been less than even 10.
Thank you for the response. And the last comment I wanted to make was just to thank you for recognizing the offensive terms that were in the bill and suggesting to take those out. I had noticed that in my read of the bill too. And I think, as legislators and all of us involved in this process, I think we have a responsibility to sort of clean some of those things up, relics of the past that are certainly no longer appropriate and probably never were in the first place. But I want to thank you for suggesting that in the amendment. And now I have questions from members. So I know there's probably a lot of questions out there, but so far, here's the order we're going to go in. And we'll start with Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, then go to Assemblyman Wheeler, followed by Assemblywoman Cohen. So Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, when you want to, please go ahead and ask your question.
Good morning, Chair Yeager, and thank you so much, Mr. Katsouras, for the presentation. And I just have one question, and that is, help me understand that the requirement for the background investigation or licensure of those who create games, you want to make some changes there. And are you implying that, just explain why you want to make that change, please?
Certainly. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, we're relegating the intercasino link systems from a category that requires full licensure to one that will be a registration. So we're not letting loose or letting go of the reins for an intercasino link system. We would still register those entities. A background investigation is done, not to the extent, however, that a full investigation would entail. As you may be familiar, the investigative process for full licensure in Nevada is not for the faint of heart. And in order to obtain licensure, it's a lengthy and expensive process. So we hold these standards for what I would consider to be the more significant aspects of our industry. Those being the manufacturers of gaming devices, operators, sports betting operators, et cetera, et cetera. But for this sort of finite category of product, we don't feel it is any longer relevant to hold this very finite and limited piece of equipment to the same standard that we would for the other more relevant facets of our industry.
Chair, follow-up question. So if you're not going to require that they have the full licensure, how deep do you go to ensure that code and other things are protected and are fair? I mean, you're talking about interlinked games, which, as you said, is this calculator. Someone is writing the code for that, right? So don't we need to be assured that those who are involved in that process are deeply investigated so that we don't have the calculator missing digits? So just-
Great question. And I didn't answer your question fully. And that's my apologies there, because on the technology side, both on the investigative background side of it, we have the discretion to conduct as lengthy of investigation as needed. However, again, given the fact that this is what we term to be sort of a lower tier type of product here, we are suggesting it be relegated to a registration, just like we have with other categories of licenses. For instance, the service provider licenses that are outlined within regulation. But on the technology side, we still do test as well, and that's where I didn't explain fully. So thank you for redirecting me on that. We do fully test that still to ensure that it is calculating properly, and we have discretion to test just as we would any other gaming device, and in fact would still be testing to the exact same level of testing that we would do even if they were required to have a full license. So thank you for that.
Let's go next to Assemblyman Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got, I think, two related questions here. You say that in here that the initial licensing fee of $500 and an annual renewal fee of $500 on these machines. Aren't these machines already paying fees for each machine? And can you justify for me what the extra $500 would be? And then my other question, which I believe is related, in section 20, subsection 2D, the new D, you are removing the section that says that the registration requirement must not exceed 1,000 per application. Does that give you, open season basically through regulation, I understand, but to just charge whatever you want for the application fee, 10,000, 2,000, $1.50, I'm just trying to figure it out here.
So what we'd be doing on that last question is aligning it with what we have in regulation now. I wouldn't use the word open season. The oversight there would still be at the commission level. We've run into a situation over the past many decades where fees haven't been adjusted for 30, 40 years. And at the same time, obviously inflation has occurred, and something that cost $100 50 years ago, still being $100 isn't necessarily relevant anymore. But there's not open season. We still would have to go to the commission. The commission would have to ratify any change in fee structure with respect to which fee are we talking about again? It was the $1,000 fee, I believe.
Well, there's two of them. There's a $500 initial fee plus $500 per year per machine. And then the registration fee in section 20, you remove the do not exceed $1,000 per application.
Okay, and that would have to be ratified by the commission. So anything in reg would have to be ratified by the commission. If there's an administrative fee, that's a different story. The first question that you had there, Assemblyman Wheeler?
Well, what I'm looking at, I can't find it in the bill, but I'm seeing it in the digest here.
Okay.
And it says,
Trying to look
existing
for
law
it as well.
requires that an annual fee in addition to the other fees. So I'm trying to justify that annual $500 fee. Right now, a lot of our gaming companies, are hurting. They're hurting bad. And I just hate to see us adding more fees and more fees and more fees.
No,
At least for the time being, until we can get back to where, we've got a good thriving economy again.
understood. So what we've done here, for instance, we're mindful of that. So the inter-casino link system, for instance, that's an example of something where they'd be significantly benefited in just getting registered. Because right now, in order to get a license for an investigation, it would cost, well, it really would depend on the type of company. But most investigations are going to, again, depending on the makeup, the individual investor and so forth, 50,000, 100,000, et cetera. So now that we're talking about a registration fee in this regard, we're nowhere even in the realm of the same neighborhood. And it would then bring it in line with the other types of registrations that we have. Anybody who wants to get an inter-casino link system would be thankful for this, frankly.
Okay, and just to follow up, Mr. Chair, if it's okay?
Please go ahead.
Just a quick question. Any of these normally would go through our interim finance committee during, the interim. Would all these fees also be subject to that or just to approval by the Gaming Control Board?
I'll take this one. This is Mike Morton for the record. The Gaming Control Board is explicitly exempt from the Administrative Procedures Act. So the board holds workshops and drafts the regulations, and then they are approved by the Nevada Gaming Commission.
Okay, so there would be no legislative oversight over these fees, and it would just be, as I said, open season.
There's no legislative oversight over the fees. I will note the $500 fees that you were talking about in the digest. That's not an existing law. This bill seeks to not change those at all.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Assemblyman Wheeler. We'll go next to Assemblywoman Cohen, who I think might have a couple of questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chair. Just one, though. I think the others were answered. And thank you for the presentation, gentlemen. In Section 20, Sub 2B, there's reference to a person having significant involvement in the manufacturing or distribution of associated equipment, et cetera. Do we have a definition for significant involvement?
I believe we do not. Mr. Morton?
Okay.
We don't have a definition of significant involvement. That language is used throughout Chapter 463. It's also the language that's used in the definition of gaming employee. At the end of the definition, the commission has the ability to call anybody forward that they think needs to be registered as a gaming employee, and in this case, registered as someone that has significant involvement in dealing with intercasino link systems and associated equipment.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add a bit more on that, when we're dealing with technology, and more, these things become nuanced because there's numerous entities or developers involved or having a hand in the development of that product. So this would give us the tools we need in order to ensure we can capture whoever it is we may deem to have a significant sort of involvement in that process of developing and manufacturing these products.
Okay, but it is a term that's used throughout the chapter. There's a general understanding.
Indeed.
The industry.
Indeed.
Thanks.
And if I can remind, I should have done this earlier, Mr. Morton and Mr. Katsaros, if you could remember to state your name before you speak, that'll help our committee secretaries when they prepare the minutes. There are only two of you, but I'll try to remind you to do that because I know it's not natural. And I think Mr. Katsaros said this is your first time presenting, so it's super awkward to do that, but I'll try to remind you, or I might just note for the record that you were speaking when you're finished so our committee secretary can prepare accurate minutes.
Thank you. I will try to remember to do that.
Do we have other questions from committee members? If you could show me your hands, raise your hand, or communicate with me in some fashion if you have a question. I see Assemblywoman Krasner has her hand up, so let's go to her next.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Katsaros, for your presentation on 87. I was just looking at Section 23 of the bill on the back. And I know you said that it repeals some provisions regarding personnel for gaming casino employees. And of course, when we look at the bill, it's just a bunch of NRS sections. So could you please explain that a little bit? Thank you.
My apologies. I couldn't quite hear that question clearly.
And so let me repeat it. Assemblywoman Krasner, your audio was sort of cutting in and out a little bit, but I think I got the gist of the question. So let me repeat that. So she was referring to Section 23 of the bill, which details the sections of NRS that are to be deleted. And I think she was asking about, essentially what those sections do that are proposed to be deleted. And I think before you answer, Mr. Katsaros, I'll note for members that through the amendment presented by the Gaming Control Board, there's a number of those sections that are now proposed to not be deleted. I think it's everything in Section NRS 463A are going to remain in statute, which I think is most of it. But Mr. Katsaros or Mr. Morton, if you want to explain what the other things are that are being deleted by Section 23.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Yeager. Phil Katsaris, Nevada Gaming Control Board member. You're exactly correct on one piece of Section 23. It basically leaves 463A of NRS untouched. The other main sort of change there has to do with repealing anything to do with entity wagering, so that it is no longer an allowable practice within Nevada. Those are the two main ones. Mr. Morton, if there was something else included that was noteworthy, if you wouldn't mind chiming in.
No, you explained it perfectly. So yes, the bill as written repeals provisions relating to gaming employee labor organizations, but the amendment if the proposed amendment were adopted, it would no longer repeal those sections.
Okay, do I have other questions from committee members? Last call for questions. Okay, I don't see any other questions at the moment. So what I'm going to do at this time is thank the two of you for presenting, and we'll have a chance for you to give concluding testimony on the bill after we take other testimony on the bill. So at this time, I'm going to open it up for testimony in support of Assembly Bill 7. I don't believe we have anyone on the Zoom with us in support. BPS, could we go to the phone line to see if there's somebody there who'd like to testify in support?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support of AB 7, press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there isn't anyone in the queue to testify in support of AB 7.
Thank you, BPS. I will close supportive testimony. I will now open it up for testimony in opposition. BPS, can we check the phone line to see if there's anyone in opposition of AB 7?
To testify in opposition of Bill AB 7, press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there isn't anybody in opposition of Bill AB 7.
Thank you, BPS. I will close opposition testimony. I will now open neutral testimony. We don't have anyone on the Zoom in neutral. BPS, could we check the phone line one last time to see if there's anyone in the neutral position?
To testify in the neutral position on Bill AB 7, press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Would the caller with the last three digits of 166 please slowly state and then spell your name for the record, and you will have 2 minutes and begin now.
Chair Yeager and members of the committee, for the record, Barry Duncan on behalf of the Nevada Taxpayers Association. Excuse me. The Nevada Taxpayers Association supports the provisions related to the live entertainment tax. We have been in contact with the Gaming Control Board to assure that provisions of the live entertainment tax are the same for businesses, whether the tax is administered and audited by the Gaming Control Board or the Department of Taxation. We are prepared to continue to work with the GCB on forthcoming amendments relative to this matter mentioned earlier in the hearing. We thank you and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. If you're still on the line, could you let me know, we were on neutral testimony, but did you intend to testify in support of the bill, or did you want your testimony to be neutral? We may have lost Mr. Duncan, so I guess for now we'll keep it as... Oh, go ahead.
Chairman Yeager, I'm sorry, we are neutral on the provisions that are not related to the LET. We are in support of the provisions relative to the LET, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. I think it does make sense. For now, we'll keep you in the neutral position, since it sounds like
Okay.
you don't have a position on the other parts of the bill. And good to hear from you, Mr. Duncan, and thank you for calling in to provide testimony today.
Chair,
BPS, do we have anybody else? Go ahead.
Chair, at this time, there is nobody else in wanting to testify in the neutral position.
Thank you, BPS. So we'll close neutral testimony, and I will hand it back to Mr. Katsaros. Mr. Morton, would you like to make any concluding remarks on Assembly Bill 7?
Phil Katsaros, Nevada Gaming Control Board. Thank you again, Chair Yeager, members of the committee. I didn't have any closing comments prepared. We just asked for your support of the provisions and proposed changes that we've submitted to this committee.
Thank you so much. I will go ahead and close the hearing on Assembly Bill 7, and we'll move on to the second bill on our agenda, Assembly Bill 8. So at this time, I will formally open the hearing on Assembly Bill 8. Assembly Bill 8 makes various changes relating to gaming, and I'll welcome back to the committee Mr. Katsaros. Mr. Morton will give you a chance to present the bill, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions for you. So please go ahead when you're ready.
Chair Yeager, members of the committee, again, for the record, I am Phil Katsaros, a member with the Nevada Gaming Control Board. Assembly Bill number 8, as written, proposes 6 changes to the Gaming Control Board Act as well. Again, for ease of reference for members following along, I'll present each of the changes from the bill as a subject rather than going through things in chronological order. So the first topic has to do with the use of electronic signatures. Section 1 and 5 allow for the use of electronic signatures on credit instruments utilized at and by gaming licensees. Currently, definition of credit instruments in NRS 463 requires the instrument to be evidenced by a writing. Changing the word from writing to record will allow for electronic credit instruments, specifically markers. Additionally, Section 5 provides authority to the Nevada Gaming Commission to adopt regulations relating to the use and validity of electronic signatures on credit instruments used in gaming. Gaming employee definition. Section 2 of this bill amends this definition of gaming employee found in 4630157 to include those employees who are required to register with the board to operate as cash access and wagering instrument service providers. And 2, the commission determines by regulation who are required to then register. While this appears to be an expansion of the persons who must register with the board, the cash access and wagering instrument service provider employees already have to register with the board, but it was simply never included within the definition of gaming employee in Chapter 463 of NR. The same catch-all provision is found in gaming employee within Chapter 463 of NRS, 463A, excuse me. Therefore, this change to the portion of the bill is only making definitions more similar between the chapters. Section 6 and 8, these amend the definition of slot machine wagering voucher to account for the facts that wagering vouchers are utilized in more than just slot machines these days. Table games, for instance, they could be used on card games and counter games. And 2, the vouchers can be in the form of digital forms, digital representations such as QR codes, perhaps a digital form of the physical tickets that you see, Microsoft tags, and other forms. Section 4 of AB 8 removes a long-standing and inadvertent conflict within NRS 463080. From the creation of the Game Control Board, the board has been required to create its own comprehensive plan of employment pursuant to section 6 of 463080. When state law was amended in 93 pursuant to the Fair Labor Standards Act, amendments were made to all employment related provisions of NRS that hindered the board from implementing its required plan of employment. The proposal in section 4 merely fixes this issue. Moving on to section 3, this amends the definition of gross revenue. Contests and tournaments that are included in the calculation of a licensee's monthly gross revenue. The last portion of the bill addresses how a licensee accounts for the final payment on credit instruments issued by the licensee. Currently, when a licensee concludes its gaming operations, it must either pay a fee on the final tax return of the license based on the outstanding value of all outstanding credit instruments, or a monthly payment based on all compensation received on paid credit instruments. Section 7 removes the option to pay monthly, which could prove difficult to manage, and frankly, it's an obsolete provision as it's never been used by licensees when they cease gaming operations, or at least not in the last couple of decades. That concludes our short presentation here today on Assembly Bill number 8, and I am prepared, along with Mr. Morton, to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple questions on section 3, which relates to gross revenue. And I guess the first thing that jumped out on me is we look at that section, subsection A mentions cash, subsection B mentions cash, subsection C mentions cash, and then in subsection D, we have compensation instead of cash. And then later on in that same provision, we're striking the phrase compensation and we're putting cash there. So I was just trying to get a handle on what the difference is really in your mind between those two, and why in most of the provisions we're saying cash, but then in the beginning of subsection D, we say compensation. So if you could maybe illuminate on that a little bit more, I think it would be helpful.
Sure. So the purpose and concept of these changes here are to properly align an inadvertent sort of oversight, I believe, from last session that inadvertently included funds received on behalf of interactive gaming operations that were part of contests or tournaments. Those funds are not included in the calculation of monthly gross revenue. And therefore, the intent here is to remove that from the calculation here to properly align how it should be and needs to be.
Mr. Morton, did you want to add something? I noticed that you unmuted.
Sure. Yeah. So to your specific question about cash and compensation, compensation is used in paragraph D of subsection 1 because it's referring to interactive gaming, which is entirely done online. So it's actually not cash changing hands.
That makes sense. Thank you for that. And then, my other question on section 3, it's kind of a broader question, and that is, here's the question. So changing this definition of gross revenue, do we think that's going to have a positive or negative impact on the amount of gross revenue that would be reported by gaming licensees?
Phil Katsaris, Nevada Gaming Control Board. I haven't actually looked at what the fiscal impact statement would say. I'm going to defer to Mr. Morton, but I would say, in my personal view, minimal, if nothing. Interactive poker, at this point, it's not as if it's been a flourishing sort of product out there right now. There's minimal activity out there. Any benefit that we get from interactive gaming right now ultimately would very likely flow down to the actual brick and mortar locations, as it were anyway.
This is Mike Morton for the record. The changes that we're making to what's included in the calculation are things that are already not included in gross revenue in practice, because they're not supposed to be. We're just changing the definition to make that clear in statute.
Thank you. And, I think we're all crossing our fingers that in terms of online poker, that Pennsylvania hopefully comes online soon and signs a compact, and maybe Michigan and some other states. So, hopefully when we have this conversation 2 years from now, we're talking about the boom in internet poker around the country. I'm hopeful, although I've been hopeful for about 6 years now, and we're still here. So we'll see how things play out in those other states. Thank you too for answering my questions on section 3. other committee members have questions on Assembly Bill 8, if you could raise your hand or get my attention in some fashion if you have a question. Okay, I don't see anything, so one last call for questions on Assembly Bill 8. Okay, I don't see questions, so I want to thank the two of you for presenting, and we'll ask you to stand by while we see if there's any additional testimony on this bill. So I don't see anyone else. I'll open up supportive testimony. There isn't anybody on the Zoom who wishes to testify in support. BPS, could we go to the phone line to see if there's somebody there who'd like to testify in support?
To testify in support of AB 8, press 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there isn't anybody in the queue to testify in support of the bill.
Thank you, BPS. I'll close testimony in support. I will now open up testimony in opposition. We don't have any opposition testimony with us on the Zoom call. BPS, can we check the phones to see if there's anyone there in opposition?
To testify in opposition of Bill AB 8, press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there isn't anyone in the queue to testify in opposition of Bill AB 8.
Thank you, BPS. I will close opposition testimony. I'll now open neutral testimony. We don't have any neutral testimony on the Zoom. Do we have any neutral testimony on the phone? BPS, if you could check, please.
To provide neutral testimony on Bill AB 8, press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the line is open and working, and there is nobody to testify in the neutral position on the bill.
Thank you, BPS. I appreciate that. So I'll close neutral testimony. Mr. Katsaros, Mr. Morton, before we go to concluding remarks, I did have one other question that I failed to ask in the initial presentation of the bill, and so I'll ask it now, and that was about the slot machine wagering voucher change that you are making in the bill. And I don't recall what section it was, but I think the explanation was obviously you can have wagering vouchers, I guess it's section 6, wagering vouchers that cover more than just slot machines. So what I'm curious about is, do we think the dollar value of expired wager vouchers will increase due to the change? And, you know, the reason I ask that is there's a provision in statute that there's basically a sharing of monies from expired vouchers. So do we think that that amount is going to increase? And if so, are you able to provide any conclusions on whether that's going to be a substantial increase or a minimal increase?
Well, thank you for that question. Again, Phil Katsaros, Nevada Gaming Control Board. That's section 6 and I believe 8. That's where we're making the definition change. It's largely a naming convention issue, but it does get to the heart of what you're suggesting, Chair Yeager, which is that at the point in time when slot machine wagering voucher was sort of instituted into law and regulation, the use of tickets really weren't used outside of slot machines. They are now able to be used across the floor, although not necessarily seamlessly just yet. That's a hope I would have in the future, that we have a more seamless flow of cash throughout a casino floor, and so that patrons have easier access to move freely as they wish without it being a clunky process, which it has been for many years. We moved from coins a long time ago, or tokens, to coins, to tickets, eventually maybe cards. But we would probably see an increase in the expiration of tickets in the future. They're still not widely used as part of the slot wagering system just yet. But as the gaming floor continues to change, yes, we'll see an increase. I'm not certain it's going. I would not characterize it as anything notable, though, and I don't have any data to be able to provide you on that, simply because it's an unknown at this time what amount that might be in the future.
Thank you for that explanation. And before we go to concluding remarks, I think I have either a comment or a question from Assemblywoman Hanson, who I may have missed on the prior bill. So please go ahead, Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. No problem. Actually, I just wanted to ask this before maybe you leave. I'm a little bit mystified that we've not had any testimony and support opposition per se to particularly AB7, which is a 30-page bill. I understand some of it's cleanup, updating language, but I know this virtual legislating session makes it maybe a little bit more cumbersome. And I don't know that you can speak on behalf of gaming. Of course, you're an oversight. I'm just really just a little bit mystified that we haven't had any correspondence today about this. Just curious if anybody else has had any feedback. Sometimes these bills look very simple or not going to do anything but maybe clean up, but I'm just at a loss to understand why nobody from industry that this impacts hasn't called in, or maybe they're having trouble. Just curious, and mainly just a comment. I'm sure you don't have an answer for them because you don't speak for them, but thank you for being here and thank you for your presentation today.
Of course, Assemblywoman Hanson, it's Mike Morton with the Gaming Control Board for the record. We, as you know, all executive branch agency bills by statute have to be pre-filed by, I think, the third Wednesday in November. So our two bills have been public since November 18th of 2020. Since publication of those bills on the legislative website, we have had conversations with the industry, mainly just their questions, seeking clarification on either why we were doing something or how this might affect regulation. And so we received no concern from the industry, and any clarifications have been cleared up prior to these hearings. But as to why no one testified in support or opposition, I don't have any answer for that one.
And I'll just note for the record too, it doesn't look like we had really anybody sign up on the website to provide testimony, which makes me think that it's not a technical issue. Or no, it's interesting, right? I mean, some of you are probably asking why we started at 8 o'clock. Well, we're going to finish up here at 9 o'clock, but sometimes it's just hard to predict if these bills are going to generate interest, and it doesn't look like these ones generated too much interest outside of the Gaming Control Board. And just so it's clear, I haven't had anybody reach out to me to really express concerns about either of these bills either. So maybe that means we just got it right this time, which is a good feeling because we don't always do that.
If I could interject.
Go ahead.
Certainly. So Phil Katsaris, Nevada Gaming Control Board again. As Mr. Morton had stated, we worked on these a long time ago. I could run through just high level each one of the sections again, but if I wanted to simply summarize, it is a lot of what you suggested, which is cleanup for the betterment of the state. And perhaps we did get it, right. Time will tell, obviously. I have had conversations, as had Gaming Control Board staff, with folks outside of our agency. It's always good to double check, what it is you're producing here. So I can say, for instance, I've spoken to Ms. Valentine at the NRA, as well as numerous other folks within the industry as well, just to, again, double check ourselves, make sure we're not always perfect. We recognize that. We want to make sure there's nothing that we maybe could have missed or what have you.
Thank you, Mr. Katsaros. And I do see there, Assemblyman Wheeler, I'll go to you in a moment. I just wanted to make clear for the members that the NRA that Mr. Katsaros references, the Nevada Resort Association. So I want to make sure there wasn't confusion about which organization, because there is another NRA that doesn't involve gaming. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that clarification. I mean, we're continually communicating with the public as well as the industry, right? Always soliciting feedback and understanding, gaining a greater understanding of the industry that we regulate.
Assemblyman Wheeler, did you have a comment or a question?
Just a quick comment, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to let you know that next time this happens, let me know. I'll get on and tell everybody how simple a bill this is, and we'll get 50 or 60 comments.
That's a true statement as well. Mr. Katsaros, I don't know if you've watched legislative hearings, but saying a bill is simple is normally the kiss of death. It means it's anything but simple. So I made the mistake of saying that last week or the week before, and then we had all kinds of technical problems. We all got kicked off the Zoom. So we're not going to say that about any bills in this committee anymore. Okay. Seeing no further comments from or questions from the members, Mr. Katsaros, Mr. Morton, any concluding remarks before we finish up Assembly Bill 8?
Phil Katsaris, Nevada Gaming Control Board again. Didn't have any other concluding comments other to simply state again, we would hope that we would have support of the very noteworthy changes that we're proposing here. A lot of cleanup, again, for the betterment of the state. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll let you off the hook. Normally, if it's your first bill presentation, we do require a song and dance in conclusion of bills, but we'll relieve you of that obligation this morning. And I want to thank you, Mr. Katsaros and Mr. Morton, for being here and presenting this morning. And if we have any additional questions, we'll be sure to reach out.
Thank you. It's been our pleasure.
Okay, have a great rest of the day. I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 8. That takes us to our last item on the agenda, which is public comment. As a reminder, we'll have up to 30 minutes of public comment. Speakers will have 2 minutes to provide their public comment. I think we might have one or two on the line. BPS, could we go to the public comment line and see if there's anybody there wishing to testify?
To provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Would the caller with the last 3 digits of 556 please slowly state your name and then spell your name for the record? You will have 2 minutes and may begin now.
Anne Marie Grant, ANNEMARIE GRANT, sister of Thomas Purdy, who was killed by Reno Police and Washoe County Sheriff's Office October 8th, 2015 during a mental health crisis. Today, I'd like to talk to you about Christopher Paul Talencorn, a.k.a. Kidders. He was 30 years old when he was asphyxiated to death 10/15/2016 by Sparks police officers George Forbush, Chris Crawford, and Eden Sturdivant. Sturdivant went on to shoot and kill Johnny Bonta 10/22/17. George Forbush was recently reported for his social media posts about building AR pistols just for BLM members. When Sparks police arrived that day for an unwanted person, they were well aware of Chris's mental illness and the fact Chris was involved in a medical call less than 24 hours prior. The officers immediately escalated the scene that was calm and nonviolent before their arrival. Due to Chris reaching into his car, Crawford, who is now the chief of police of Sparks, decided that they should go hands-on and handcuff Chris. To gain control, the 3 officers applied their full weight to Chris for 4 to 5 minutes. Witness Katrina T. stated officers had Chris by the neck trying to make Chris pass out, and witness Forbush knee striking Chris. Katrina said Chris passed out from the chokehold and went limp. Forbush in his report acknowledges the knee strikes and stated he noticed Chris wasn't breathing, and then they rolled him onto his side. That should have happened immediately. Throughout the video, my brother hog-tied at the pepper mill. They kept Thomas face down and a knee in his back and never rolled him over to his side. Christopher was declared brain dead upon arrival to the hospital. No officer attempted CPR on Chris. They waited for Remza to arrive. Chris was a father, son, brother, friend, and so much more to so many people. Do not let any more community members die in vain. Please do not support bills that protect bad police. Support bills that promote transparency and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment, Ms. Grant. BPS, is there anybody else for public comment?
To provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the line is open and working, and there are no other callers in the public comment queue.
Thank you, BPS. Appreciate your hard work in helping us through this meeting. I will now close the public comment line. Before we talk about the rest of the week, is there anything else from any committee members this morning? Have you all on my screen? You all look happy that we're ending a little early so you can get some work done and prepare for your next committee meetings. So seeing nothing else from the members, let me just give you kind of the lay of the land of where we're going the rest of this week. Tomorrow, we will have a meeting at 8 a.m. We have 3 bills, so I think that's it's a record for us so far this session. So we'll see if we can get through all 3 of those bills. And for the presenters of those bills, I'll reach out to you to let you know what order we intend to take those in. So I'll do that before the end of the day today. I'm not sure if we have an agenda out yet for Thursday, but we are going to have a meeting on Thursday. I think we'll have 1 bill, and we're going to be starting at 9 o'clock on Thursday morning. So you'll have an extra hour on Thursday morning. And then I do anticipate a meeting on Friday. I don't yet know what time we're going to start. I believe we're probably going to have a work session and consider some of the bills that we've heard so far, but I'm checking on that, and we may have a bill or 2 as well. I just don't know yet. So hopefully by the meeting tomorrow, I'll be able to tell you what Friday looks like. So that's where we are going from here. Again, committee members, appreciate your attention and your questions this morning. I hope you all have a great rest of the day. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, and this meeting is adjourned.
Bye. Thank you, Chair.